The host's audience was ready for another battle, fully expecting Karoline to be the next victim. They had seen countless guests fold under the host's intense questioning, their arguments falling apart under pressure. It was almost like a game to the host, setting traps and watching people walk right into them. But Karoline wasn't just another guest. She didn't walk into that studio unprepared. She knew what to expect, and she had come with a strategy of her own. From the very first moment, the atmosphere was tense. The host greeted Karoline with a tight smile, but there was no warmth behind it. It was clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly discussion. This was a battlefield for ideas, and both sides were ready to fight for their belief. Karoline sat calmly, hands folded, her eyes locked on the host. She looked composed, but underneath the calm surface, she was ready for anything. When the cameras zoomed in for the opening shot, the host wasted no time. They started the conversation with a question that sounded innocent enough, but was loaded with hidden criticism. Karoline, in today's world, we're seeing progress in so many areas. Don't you think it's time to move past these traditional, outdated views? It was a common trick, make it sound like progress was obvious, and anyone who disagreed must be stuck in the past. The audience waited for Karoline to stumble. But instead of flinching, Karoline leaned forward slightly. The calmness in her voice was almost unnerving. Progress is good, but only if we know where we're going, she said. Her response caught the host off guard. It wasn't defensive or aggressive, just clear and thoughtful. The host's smile wavered just for a second. The audience leaned in, sensing that something different was happening. This wasn't going to be a simple interview where the host controlled the narrative. Karoline had come to play on her own terms. The host quickly recovered from Karoline's initial response. They weren't used to guests holding their ground so easily. But instead of backing off, the host decided to press harder. Karoline, people like you often talk about values and tradition, but don't you think those ideas are holding us back? We're in the 21st century. Shouldn't we be moving forward instead of clinging to the past? The question was designed to make Karoline look outdated, even ignorant. It was a classic move, paint anyone who disagrees as being stuck in the past. The audience waited, expecting Karoline to stumble over her words or give a weak answer. But once again, she didn't take the bait. Karoline smiled, a small, confident smile that didn't show any sign of stress. I believe in moving forward, she said, her tone steady and sure. But progress doesn't mean throwing away everything that made us who we are. You can't build a future if you tear down the foundation. The room fell silent for a moment. The host's usual tactics weren't working. They had expected Karoline to be defensive or flustered, but instead, she was calm and clear. She wasn't there to play defense, she was there to speak her truth. But the host wasn't ready to give up. They leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. You talk about tradition like it's sacred. But what about change? What about adapting to the times we live in? Are you saying we should just stop evolving? It was a clever twist, and the host clearly thought they had found a weak spot. But Karoline didn't miss a beat. Change is good when it makes us better, she said. But not all change is progress. Some changes take us further away from the truth, not closer to it. Her words hung in the air. The audience was silent, waiting for the host's next move. But for the first time, the host looked uncertain. The usual tactics weren't working, and it was becoming clear that this wasn't going to be an easy interview. Karoline wasn't just holding her own, she was shifting the balance of power in the room. The host decided to switch tactics. Instead of attacking Karoline's ideas directly, they moved on to something more personal. Karoline, people have said that your views are extreme. Some even call them dangerous. How do you respond to that? It was another trap, one designed to put Karoline on the defensive. The host was hoping to force her into justifying herself, which would make her seem weak. But Karoline didn't take the bait. Instead of getting defensive, she stayed calm and focused. I think it's dangerous when we stop listening to different perspectives, she said. Disagreement doesn't make someone dangerous. It's when we refuse to have conversations like this that we run into trouble. The host's eyes flickered with frustration. They weren't used to guests turning their questions around so easily. The usual tricks weren't working, and it was starting to show. But Karoline wasn't finished. If we want real progress, we need to have real conversations. That means listening to people we disagree with, not just labeling them as extreme or dangerous. The audience was hooked. Every word Karoline said was clear and simple, but it carried weight. She wasn't just answering questions, she was turning the conversation into something deeper. The host had come prepared for a fight, but Karoline had come with truth and clarity. The battle of ideas was far from over, but one thing was clear. Karoline wasn't going down without a fight. And for the first time, it looked like the host might not win this one. The host was now visibly frustrated. The usual tricks weren't working, and the audience could feel the tension growing. Determined not to lose control of the conversation, the host leaned in, their tone becoming sharper. Karoline, you talk about listening to different perspectives, but aren't some views just harmful? Don't we have a responsibility to shut down ideas that can hurt people? It was a direct challenge, and the audience waited for Karoline's reaction. The host was trying to paint her as someone who tolerated harmful views. It was a common tactic: if you can't defeat someone's arguments, attack their character. Karoline took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice was calm, but there was a new edge to it. The real danger isn't in hearing different opinions. The danger is when we decide that some voices don't deserve to be heard at all. That's how you end conversation. That's how you end progress. Her response was simple, but it carried weight. She wasn't just defending herself, she was making a point about free speech and open dialogue. The audience listened closely. Even those who didn't agree with Karoline's views couldn't deny the strength of her argument. The host tried again. But don't you see how certain ideas can make people feel unsafe? Shouldn't we be protecting people from harmful speech? Karoline didn't hesitate. Of course, we should protect people from harm. But we also have to protect the right to speak. If we silence everyone we disagree with, how do we ever learn? How do we ever grow? You can't build understanding if you refuse to listen. The host was clearly struggling to regain control of the conversation. Karoline wasn't just holding her own, she was pushing back, and it was becoming harder for the host to keep up. The audience could feel the shift in the room. Sensing that the direct attacks weren't working, the host tried a new tactic, making Karoline seem out of touch. You're very passionate about your views, Karoline. But don't you think you're out of step with the majority of people today? Times have changed, and most people have moved on from these old ideas. It was another common move: suggest that someone's views were no longer relevant. The goal was to make Karoline feel isolated, like she was fighting a losing battle. But once again, Karoline was ready. Truth doesn't go out of style, she said, her tone steady. And just because something is popular doesn't mean it's right. History is full of examples where the majority got it wrong. What matters isn't following the crowd. What matters is standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard. The audience was captivated. Karoline's words were simple but powerful. She wasn't just defending her views, she was standing up for the importance of independent thought. The host's frustration was now visible. They had tried everything, attacking her ideas, questioning her relevance, even going after her character. But nothing was working. Karoline wasn't just holding her ground, she was winning the audience's respect. The conversation had reached a critical point. The host was running out of options, and the audience could sense it. Desperate to regain control, the host decided to make one final push. Karoline, with all due respect, people like you are standing in the way of progress. You're clinging to old traditions instead of embracing the future. Don't you see how that's harmful? It was a harsh statement, designed to corner Karoline once and for all. The audience held their breath, waiting to see how she would respond. Karoline's eyes met the host's, and for a moment, the room was completely silent. Then, she spoke, her voice calm but filled with conviction. Progress isn't about tearing down everything that came before. It's about building on a strong foundation. If we forget where we came from, we lose our way. I'm not against progress. I'm for truth, and I'm for freedom. Those are values worth protecting. The host opened their mouth to respond but seemed to hesitate. There was nothing left to say. Karoline's words had hit their mark, and everyone in the room knew it. The conversation was almost over, but the host wasn't ready to give up completely. They tried one last question, a final attempt to salvage the interview. Karoline, what do you say to people who think you're just too stubborn? That you refuse to change, even when the world is moving forward? Karoline smiled, a confident but humble smile that showed she wasn't rattled. I say that standing firm isn't the same as being stubborn. If you know what you believe and why you believe it, you don't change just because it's popular. You change when there's a reason, when the truth leads you to something better. But until that happens, I'll keep standing for what I believe is right. The audience erupted in applause. Even those who didn't agree with Karoline couldn't help but respect her courage and clarity. She had faced every challenge with grace and strength, refusing to be silenced or intimidated. The host sat back, clearly defeated. They had tried every trick in the book, but nothing had worked. Karoline hadn't just survived the interview, she had owned it. As the cameras stopped rolling, it was clear that this wasn't just another debate. This was a moment where a bold voice refused to be silenced, standing tall in the face of relentless opposition. And in the end, it wasn't the host who had the final word, it was Karoline Leavitt, whose epic comeback had shut them down once and for all. As the interview came to an end, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The energy that had once been tense and aggressive was now filled with a sense of awe and respect. Karoline Leavitt had done what few could. She had walked into a hostile environment, stayed true to her beliefs, and left with her dignity intact. The host, known for their relentless questioning, sat back in their chair, clearly unsure how to end the segment. They had used every trick, every angle, and every emotional appeal, but Karoline had remained calm and composed throughout. The audience, both in the studio and at home, had witnessed something rare, a battle of ideas where one side stood unwavering in the face of immense pressure. As the cameras turned off and the studio lights dimmed, Karoline rose from her seat. The host, still visibly frustrated but trying to maintain professionalism, extended a hand. "You held your ground," the host admitted. "I'll give you that." Karoline smiled politely. "I didn't come here to win. I came here to share what I believe. That's what matters to me." The comment left the host speechless. It was a reminder that Karoline wasn't there for fame or applause. She was there because she believed in something bigger than herself. The interview quickly became the talk of social media. Clips of Karoline's responses were shared thousands of times, with people on both sides of the political spectrum weighing in. Some praised her courage, calling her a rising star in the conservative movement. Others, even those who didn't agree with her, admitted that she had handled the interview with grace and strength. Comment sections were flooded with reactions. "Finally, someone who doesn't back down," one user wrote. Another added, "You don't have to agree with her to respect her. She made her points clearly without resorting to name-calling." The liberal host supporters tried to spin the interview as a victory, but the general consensus was clear: Karoline had held her own, and then some. News outlets picked up the story, analyzing her performance and discussing what it meant for the larger conversation around free speech, debate, and differing viewpoints. Back at home, Karoline took a moment to reflect on the experience. She knew going into the interview that it wouldn't be easy. The host was known for being tough, and the audience wasn't exactly friendly territory. But Karoline had made a promise to herself long ago: she would never compromise her beliefs, no matter how difficult the conversation. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, Karoline scrolled through some of the comments online. She was used to criticism, but she was also seeing a surprising amount of support. People were resonating with her message: stand firm in your beliefs, but do it with respect and clarity. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a friend who had watched the interview. "You crushed it," the message read. "You didn't just survive, you won people's respect." Karoline smiled. Respect was more important to her than applause. She wasn't interested in owning anyone or making enemies. Her goal was simple: to speak the truth as she saw it and invite others to think for themselves. The aftermath of the interview sparked a larger conversation across multiple platforms. Pundits and analysts began discussing the importance of civil discourse. Many pointed to Karoline's performance as a model for how debates should be handled: calm, respectful, and rooted in clear principles. One popular commentator summed it up well: "We live in a time where people are quick to label and cancel those they disagree with." But Karoline Leavitt showed us something different. She didn't attack or insult. She simply stood firm in her beliefs and invited conversation. That's the kind of leadership we need more of. Even some of the host's usual supporters admitted that the interview had revealed weaknesses in the aggressive debate style. "Maybe it's time we rethink how we approach these conversations," one commentator suggested. "Instead of trying to trap people, maybe we should focus on really listening." Karoline knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Standing up for your beliefs always came with challenges, especially in today's polarized world. But she also knew that conversations like the one she had just experienced were essential. The next morning, Karoline sat down to write a reflection piece for her followers. In it, she shared her thoughts on the interview and what it had taught her. "Disagreement doesn't have to mean division," she wrote. "We can stand firm in our beliefs while still respecting others. And when we listen to each other, even when it's hard, we create space for real progress." Her words resonated deeply with her audience. Comments flooded in, thanking her for her courage and thoughtfulness. "Keep speaking the truth," one follower wrote. "You're an inspiration to so many." Karoline closed her laptop, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The interview had been a challenge, but it had also been an opportunity. A chance to show that standing for truth doesn't mean being stubborn or hateful. It means being clear, courageous, and compassionate. And as Karoline prepared for whatever came next, one thing was certain: her voice wasn't just heard. It was respected. And in today's world, that was a victory all its own. The day after the interview, Karoline's social media accounts experienced a surge in new followers. Her inbox was filled with messages from people thanking her for standing her ground. Some admitted that they didn't fully agree with her views but respected the way she carried herself. Others said they were inspired to start speaking up about their own beliefs without fear of being silenced. Karoline read each message carefully. One stood out, a young college student who wrote, "I've always been afraid to speak my mind in class because I'm scared of being judged. But watching your interview gave me confidence. You showed me that it's okay to disagree as long as you do it with respect." This message moved Karoline deeply. It reminded her why she had entered public life in the first place: to inspire people to think for themselves and to stand for their values, even when it was difficult. Meanwhile, the liberal host was facing their own wave of feedback. Their usual supporters were divided. Some felt the host had been too aggressive and suggested taking a more balanced approach in future interviews. Others doubled down, insisting that Karoline should have been shut down more forcefully. In private, the host reflected on the interview. Despite their frustration during the conversation, they couldn't deny one thing: Karoline had handled herself with grace. She hadn't taken the bait or resorted to personal attack. Instead, she had calmly made her points and left a lasting impression. During their next show, the host addressed the interview briefly. Karoline Leavitt stood her ground, they admitted. While we may disagree on many issues, I respect her willingness to engage in an open conversation. That's what debate should be about. It was a rare acknowledgement, and it didn't go unnoticed. Viewers appreciated the honesty, and some even praised the host for showing humility. The impact of Karoline's performance extended beyond social media. Within days, she received multiple invitations to speak at events and participate in panel discussions. Organizations that valued free speech and open debate were eager to hear more from her. One invitation stood out: a national conference focused on promoting civil discourse. The organizers reached out personally, saying, "Your interview was a masterclass in respectful debate. We'd love for you to share your insights with our audience." Karoline was honored. She accepted the invitation, knowing it was an opportunity to continue the conversation about the importance of listening to different perspectives. At the conference, she shared the lessons she had learned. True dialogue isn't about winning or losing. It's about understanding. And understanding only happens when we're willing to listen, even when it's uncomfortable. Her speech was met with a standing ovation. The ripple effect of Karoline's interview continued to spread. More people began discussing the importance of respectful debate, and some even started organizing their own forums for open conversations. One group of college students launched a new initiative called Listen First, inspired by Karoline's message. Their mission was simple: create spaces where people with different views could come together to share their perspectives without fear of judgment. Karoline learned about the initiative through social media and was thrilled. She reached out to the group to offer her support. "This is exactly what we need more of," she told them. "Change starts with conversations like these." As Karoline reflected on everything that had happened since the interview, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would always be challenges and disagreements. But she also knew that meaningful change came from standing firm in your beliefs while remaining open to dialogue. In the weeks that followed, Karoline continued to speak out, write, and engage with people from all walks of life. Her message remained the same: stand for what you believe, but do it with respect and courage. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Karoline was ready. She had faced the heat of the debate, and she had come out stronger. Her voice had made an impact, and that impact was just beginning. For Karoline Leavitt, the future was bright. And as she continued her journey, one thing was clear. Her story wasn't just about one interview. It was about a movement for truth, respect, and the power of open conversation. The story of Karoline Leavitt's interview became a defining moment in her career. It wasn't just a tale of standing firm in the face of pressure, it was a testament to the power of respectful disagreement and meaningful conversation. People across the country continued to talk about how she handled the tough questions with grace, clarity, and confidence. As weeks turned into months, Karoline's influence grew. More people began to embrace the idea that disagreement didn't have to lead to division. They learned from her example: listen carefully, respond thoughtfully, and never compromise your values just to fit in. Karoline, however, remained grounded. She knew that public life wasn't about applause or recognition, it was about staying true to what you believed, no matter the circumstances. And she was determined to continue speaking up, not just for herself, but for everyone who felt silenced or afraid to share their views. Her journey was far from over. New challenges and opportunities would come, but Karoline was ready for all of it. The world had seen her strength, and her story became an inspiration for countless others. And as she continued forward, Karoline's mission remained the same: speak the truth, invite conversation, and lead with courage. Because in the end, it wasn't just about winning debates. It was about standing for something greater. And that's exactly what Karoline Leavitt did.